In this video, we're going to show you the most common mistakes that can trip up your mixes and how to avoid them. Let's check it out. Hey guys, it's Steve from Featherlight Studio, and today we're going to talk about the most common categories that can trip up your mixes and how to work around them. And the first one might surprise you, but it's actually how and when you record. Back in the day, the process of tracking and mixing and mastering, most times were actually done in 3 completely different facilities because of the perspective that they offered. But nowadays, because DAWs are so sophisticated, we can do them all instantly. So let's dive in and find out why that may not always be the best approach to getting your mixes correct.
But you know me, dear, I would never ask you to stay.
Today's sophisticated DAWs allow us to track, mix, and master all at the same time. But tracking is all about performance. It's all about getting the perfect take and getting emotion recorded correctly. If we're splitting our attention between trying to get the perfect take and mixing as we go, we're cheating ourselves out of the perspective that we really need while we're tracking. So if you're in the tracking process, try to stay in the tracking process for as long as you can. If you're tracking, for example, a drum set, and you're not getting the sound that you want, then adjust the mic position. If you need more of the shell and the overall sound, back the mic up. If you need more attack and smack, bring the mic closer. If you're tracking a vocal or if you're tracking an amplifier, move the mic position around to a bunch of different locations and try a lot of different things. Try to get the best possible sound into your recorder first, before you even start about mixing.
Mosquitos and flies, philosophers are devils and demons alike.
Just as tracking and mixing at the same time causes problems, the same is true when you're mixing and trying to master at the same time. Using mastering effects on your main stereo outs while trying to mix at the same time actually does 2 different things. It stresses your computer because most mastering software suites like Ozone and other ones have a significant CPU load. And at the same time, it causes a lot of frustration for you, the mixer, because you're constantly jumping back and forth between what sounds like it needs to be fixed at the mix stage and what is being corrected by the mastering effects on the master bus.
The whiskey lives on, still lurking in the
You'll have far more perspective in the overall process if you export out of your DAW and give yourself a break between the mixing and mastering process. If you're not in the position to have your tracks professionally mastered, re-importing that 2-track stereo file into a dedicated 2-track editor like Wavelab or something similar will allow you to treat that stereo file as a single entity instead of a multi-track file. And this is a really important shift if you're going to master your own material. Most dedicated 2-track editors offer very sophisticated tools to be able to master your own material with, and even free 2-track editors like Audacity can host VSTs, which will allow you to use your own plugins. If you don't have access to or don't want to use a 2-track editor, you can simply re-import the stereo WAV file back into your DAW. But the important takeaway here is that you get the perspective gained by breaking up the process between the mixing and the mastering stage. One of the most important things about getting a great mix starts with getting a great performance. Now, we have plugins for all kinds of stuff. We've got plugins for pitch and for timing and for tonality and all this different stuff, but there is no plugin to fix a bad performance. Preparing things like project templates and headphone cues and mixes and headphone amp levels that go to the performer ahead of time will allow you to keep that performer in that creative zone for as long as possible. Otherwise, they're going to get stuck in downtimes, and that downtime is going to be a distraction. Whether it's other people in the room or it's their phone, it's going to take them out of that creative zone. And staying in that zone as long as possible is the key to getting great performances and later, great mixes. One of the other most important things that keep you in that kind of creative mix zone for as long as possible is known as mix architecture. And this is really how your sessions are set up. If your sessions are confusing with a ton of nested folders and things that are difficult to find, it's going to be a lot harder for you to make mix decisions on the fly because you're going to get stuck in the tech zone a lot, and nothing derails a mix faster than getting stuck in the tech zone.
So I'm shot down, buried the night, then you walk away.
Here at the studio, most of our modern day projects are well over hundreds of tracks, and that gets out of hand in a pretty big hurry, especially if you're diving through a lot of nested folders, trying to find specific things. It makes a lot more sense to use the same idea that large format mixers were designed to solve, and that's grouping your tracks so that they're easy to find at a glance when you're making quick decisions. In this particular case, we're grouping all of our aux returns, our effects bus returns, and our group channels to the right side of the mixer so that we can make quick, informed, and on-the-fly decisions as we're going through the mix. By having all those large categories easy to find and easy to get to, we can stay in that mix zone, that creative zone, a lot longer. One of the other biggest categories that can trip up most home studio mixes is gain staging. If you understand gain staging, especially as it relates to software, it'll save you more headache down the road than just about anything, and it'll give you more control over your mixes than just about anything, because gain staging affects directly the signal path and sound of your mixes. I've done a complete series of videos for both hardware and software gain staging, and I'll leave that info in the links below, but the long and short of it is this. Your audio signal path is like a river. It runs from one origin to one destination. So anything you do to a track or a bus or a send is going to affect whatever is downstream of it.
How many times do I have to say that it cuts me to?
In this example, we have a bass track that's being fed to a bass group track to make mixing easier and also to apply stereo effects since the bass line itself of the track is mono. And on our group, we have a compressor. So if we simply just turn the track up, it's not going to get louder as much as it's simply going to hit the compressor harder. So the gain staging decisions that we make at the track level are going to affect what actually happens at the group level, and so on, all the way to the master bus. So for good gain staging practices, we want to make sure that one track or one output from a device doesn't overdrive or underdrive the devices downstream from it. Gain staging applies to our master bus as well. Here we have a bus compressor on our 2 bus. If we gang select all of our group aux and effects tracks and simply turn them up, the mix isn't going to get louder. It's simply going to hit the bus compressor harder. And if there's no bus compressor on the 2 bus, our stereo outputs, then it'll eventually just clip or distort the master bus or the audio interface outputs that you're running through. And not in a cool, vibey kind of analog way, but in a crappy sort of clipping, distorted kind of way. Many plugin manufacturers like Waves, for example, actually include gain staging requirements into their plugin emulations. This 1176 compressor, for example, expects to see the same signal input level that its hardware counterpoints actually operated the most effectively at. And if the upstream signal coming into the compressor is too hot, you'll get a clip light indicator telling you that it's not working at its most efficient range. One of the other big categories of things that really separates amateur productions from professional finished mixes is pitch and timing work for the vocal. And I'm not talking about T-Pain kind of artificial effects. I'm talking about subtle pitch and timing that actually allows the vocal to sit perfectly in the mix. So let's find out a bit more about how to put the vocal into a pocket.
And they all look like you. If I'm trying hard enough.
So one of the most challenging things of all mixes is to get the vocal to sit in the pocket. When we say pocket, what we're referring to is getting the vocal to sit comfortably as far as level, but also as far as tonality, as far as EQ. Is the vocal too bright or too dark for the overall mix? And does it sit comfortably in the rhythm track? And so most DAWs give us a lot of tools to be able to change that up. And there's a lot of plugins out there as well that are capable of that. So plugins like Waves Tune, for example, does a really good job of pitch and of timing editing. And so does Melodyne. Melodyne's another very sophisticated plugin that allows you to make really sophisticated changes. We're working in Cubase here, and Cubase does as well. Cubase gives us the ability to make really sophisticated changes to the actual vocal line itself. So for example, we have this vocal line here.
But you know me, dear. I would never ask you to stay.
And that's actually sung beautifully. That's Shaene Marie Pascal, and she does a great job. She's a really talented and really technically skilled singer If we double click on the vocal clip, it opens up Steinberg's Very Audio. This is its vocal timing and vocal pitch correction editing suite. And we simply click on this, it analyzes the note segments. And if we shrink this up here, we can see. And this is basically just giving us a graphical readout of where the pitch and the timing of the notes are. And so from here, but this was done really, really well to begin with. And so we have this feature enabled where if we simply grab the clip and move it, it'll immediately snap to its relative pitch range. And we're not making big changes here. We're simply subtly moving them back and forth to get them into the ballpark so that it sits really comfortably with the tune of the instruments. And as you can see, she's really, really close. Shaene does a great job, and we almost never have to do a ton of work on here. But if we needed to, we could cut up these segments, for example, and we could move them around. We could tighten the timing up just a hair if we needed that section to be a little bit smoother in a transition. And again, we're not talking about major surgery here. Being able to do that with pitch and with timing is a powerful feature, but it's also easy to overdo. So we want to make sure that the changes that we make here are subtle and organic and really just aid in having the vocal sit in the pocket of the song. This next mix tip has to do with using loops and samples in your project, especially if you use templates in your workflow. It's an easy one to mistake and not as noticeable if the bulk of your project is loop and sample based. But if you have a lot of acoustic tracks, like acoustic drum tracks and other things, these kinds of tracks require completely different processing than sample-based tracks and loops do. In this project example, we're using some loops to reinforce the overall drum sound, but those loops are going through the existing drums bus. The problem here is that loops and samples have already been mixed and mastered to perfection. If we run them back through the same buses and tracks that our acoustic tracks are running through, we're effectively doubling all the processing on those loops and samples. So whenever possible, when you're using loops and samples in a project, create a separate loops and samples bus in each category. So if it's drums or if it's bass or whatever, so that you can process those sounds completely separately. They can have their own EQ, they can have their own compression. You can make them tonally much closer to the sounds in the rest of your project by treating those sounds completely independently.
Green, no taxes, get your ass ran over in it Ford Raptors. Rise up the enterprise firm is confirmed.
One of the next most common mix mistake categories is not checking your project for mono compatibility and phase issues. In this example, we're inside of Cubase and we're using Steinberg's Supervision, which is a great monitoring utility that allows us to check the phase. And as we widen our backing tracks, we need to check to make sure that those backing tracks aren't going to collapse in mono, since so much of our music is consumed on mobile devices, and when you're not listening to headphones, a lot of mobile devices still sum your project to mono when playing it back.
The mighty West Coast better known for the greens. Let's take a ride on the I-5, and we gon' stay fly till the day we die. Stepping out the glove full of love, breathe in. 3 a.m. hit the heater in the bins. Fire up the blood, switch a sweet sour diesel. Giving up the deuces to your homies and your people. Sipping on the flash, hit the gas full throttle. Rubbing on that leg of that top-notch model. Beat banging out that, knocking that system.
So as you can hear, switching back from mono to stereo changes the perception of the volume of the lead vocal against the backing tracks. If you have excessive widening in your project, always check for mono compatibility. If you're working with acoustic instruments like drum sets, make sure that you're taking into consideration the phase differences between the microphones. For example, the bottom snare microphone in relationship to the upper overheads. Next up on our mix checklist is not taking advantage of parallel processing whenever possible to add density and excitement to your tracks. In this example, we have a bass and drum groove started inside this basic project. It sounds like this. So we want to use the concept of parallel processing to have more control over the overall bass line. So we're going to duplicate our bass track into 2 completely separate tracks. For now, we're going to mute the duplicated track and we're just going to work on the low end track. On this track, we're going to put an EQ on there and we're going to use this EQ to divide the low and high frequencies and make them independent from one another so that we can process the low frequency of the bass line independently from the high frequency. So we're going to cut off everything from about the low mids all the way up. And we're going to use a fairly broad slope so that we're not affecting the phase too much. The idea here is to keep the bass fundamental alive, especially if we start adding EQ and distortion to the high frequency track. We don't want that to affect our low frequency bass track. Now that we've got the low end sound that we're after, it's time to mute that track and move on to the next track, which contains our high frequencies. We're going to do the same process by using an EQ, only this time it's going to be the reverse, and we're going to use a low end shelf to cut everything off from about 200 down. And as before, we're going to use fairly broad slopes here so that it doesn't affect the overall phase of the bass when we marry the two tracks together in our buses later. From here, we can tweak the top end of the bass for the sound and the tone that we're after, and we can add downstream effects like compression to add more punch and density without sacrificing the fundamental of the bass tone. Now, when we add those two independent bass tracks to their own bus in our project, we have complete control over the high and low end of the bass. The idea of parallel processing can add a lot of power and pressure and density to your tracks, as we saw in the bass, and it's especially effective on drums. However, because a drum track, especially an acoustic drum recording, which is multi-track, isn't just one audio file, we can't simply duplicate it like we did with the bass track. In this example, then, we actually have to take the drums bus in our buses section, and we need to create an additional bus to run alongside of it. We're going to call this new aux bus Drums Crush, and we're going to create a send from our main drums group to our new aux bus. And it's important that this send be set to what is known as the pre-position instead of post. This way, any changes to our drums bus won't affect our drums crush aux bus, and we can audition the aux bus independently. In addition, we've put a distressor style plugin on our drums crush aux bus, and this is going to allow us to really slam this channel and get a completely saturated sound of the drums. Now we'll drop the fader on our new aux bus and we'll bring back up our regular drums bus fader and then slowly raise the aux bus until we start to hear more density and pressure in our overall drum sound. And as you can hear, a little goes a long way. You can make a big difference simply by adding a little bit of that crush track to our existing drum sound. This is a very effective technique on lots of different kinds of instruments, all the way from bass and drums up to vocals. And you may be surprised to learn that a lot of your existing plugins actually have a mix knob built right into the interface, which accomplishes the same thing as building an extra bus for parallel processing. This saves you a lot of extra steps and allows you to accomplish this same technique all inside the plugin's interface. Parallel processing can be a powerful tool if used in moderation and something you might want to consider inside your mixing projects. One of the other really big areas that can affect the way your mixes affect other people emotionally is mix dynamics. Does your mix ebb and flow? Does it have emotional high points and low points? Or is it flat? Have you squashed all of the dynamics out of it? These are really challenging things to get a hold of, especially at the end of a mix where you've got a lot of things happening, there's a lot of things in play. One of the most effective ways to engage your listeners emotionally is with the use of automation. Automation is typically done at the end of a project when the bulk of the mix structure has already been set and the layout is kind of gelled and sort of in place. Adding changes to the song structure, like bringing the chorus up or maybe bringing the verse sections down or changing the intro and outro dynamics, can make a big emotional impact on your listeners. But the process of automation can be used for so much more than that, since most modern-day DAWs allow just about every single parameter inside your project, including your plugins, to be completely automated. For example, automating things like effect sends from your individual tracks or buses to your effects can make a big emotional impact during certain sections of your song. In this example, We're automating several parameters at once. We're taking some of the low end out of the reverb during the chorus sections. We're scooping some of the mids out of the vocal. We're adding some top end to the guitar bus, and we're lengthening the reverb on the pedal steel solo sections. Back in the day, all these changes would have been made with people sitting in front of the consoles working in tandem to achieve a final mix. But nowadays, they can be done with ease, and they can be re-recorded until you get exactly the sound you're looking for. So using automation is a powerful tool, and definitely a skill that you want to master in your own mix projects, as it's a great way to enhance the emotional connection of the song with your listeners. And one of the most important parts of the mix process, maybe one of the most important parts, is to get fresh perspective. So take a break. Take a lot of breaks. Come back, clear your head, take a change of scenery, and just relax for a minute. Give yourself an hour or two and come back. Listen to your mix with fresh ears. The mix will sound better. You'll be able to make more informed and critical decisions with a completely new perspective than if you just try to go through the entire process start to finish. And one of the final categories that has a huge impact on whether your mixes sound professional and finished is the use of commercial reference tracks. So let's find out a bit more about how to use these reference tracks to make your work sound finished and commercially effective. We've talked a lot about this in previous videos, but there's a reason why using commercially mastered tracks to judge your work against shows up in so many different mixing tutorials. One of the things that trips up most mixing engineers is having too much of something or too little of something in your finished mixes. If they're too bottom heavy or not bottom heavy enough, if you have too much high end or too little, too much mids or not enough, all of those things can be clearly judged against commercial reference tracks. Online music streaming sources like Apple Music and Spotify and others are a great place to hear commercially mastered tracks in the playback medium you're likely to listen to them in. And this is an important distinction because we need to do a few things before we can audition our mixes side by side to commercially mixed and mastered tracks. One of the most important things that we have to start with is make sure that our music reference and the playback from our DAW is played back through the exact same system and that that main level never changes. If we alter the level of either of those things, the music reference or the playback from the DAW or our main volume on our audio interface, we'll lose the reference point needed to make the comparison in the first place. Another critical point is if you're listening to commercially mastered and mixed tracks, you may need to drop the level of the music reference slightly to make up for the difference and loudness that a commercially mastered track is going to have compared to your own mixes. So that's my top list of all the categories that we check off on almost every session we do here at the studio. And if you do the same, you'll find that your mixes are more focused, they make a bigger emotional impact, and they're more commercially competitive. Hey, if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It really does help keep the channel going, helps me make more videos like this. Stay safe, be creative, add something creative to the world. We'll catch you guys in the next video.